Wait for it. Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Aaron Canton, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hello, and thank you for having me on your show. As Mr. Handley said, my name is Aaron Canton. I'm an engineer as my day job, and I also write YA Fantasy, which is why I'm here. In terms of my biography, I went to college in Philadelphia. I did my undergrad and my graduate there. I did my postdocs in Singapore, so I was there kind of an itinerant postdoc for a couple of years. Came back and moved out to Salt Lake City for work, and I've been living here for a few years, and I really love it. It's a good city.
Okay, where in Philadelphia did you go to college?
Drexel University. It's like right by University of Pennsylvania.
I went to Nova for grad school, and I lived on the main line, so I'm familiar with the area.
Okay.
It was a unique experience working in the coffee shops there. We had when I was working there, so I started off at the Villanova's coffee shop on campus. It's on a functioning monastery. I don't know if everyone realized that Villanova is a functioning monastery.
Oh, I didn't
in
know
addition
that.
to a college, is a Jesuit college. And so the coffee shop is called the Holy Grounds Cafe, which is just perfectly like punny. I whoever thought of that needs an extra like latte or something. Genius. But I realized that was only open when school was open. So I got poached by Starbucks just down the street. So I was a barista there. And of course, you know, when I was at the Holy Grounds Cafe, it was all college students, right? College students, grad students, and the professors and the monks. When I got to the Starbucks, it was just, you know, your rank and file people, you know, getting ready to catch the train into wherever. And so I met my first au pair there, which is just a fancy word for a nanny. And watching them like unscrew the top of the baby bottle filled with milk, presumably because it was white, and then pour a shot of espresso into this baby's bottle. I'm like, holy crap, this is a different world. And then of course you ask them, and you know, generally it's like really thick Slavic accents, and be like, oh, this is how we do it in my country. I'm horrible at accents, clearly, because that sounded a lot more like Rocky Bowinkle than anything from like the Slavic countries, but whatever. Yeah, so it's a whole new world out there. What was your experience like living there? Is that where you're from originally?
No, I'm originally from Chicago area, a little bit north of Chicago. I went to Philadelphia again for college. I enjoyed it. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the lab, of course, as a grad student. That's what they expected of us. But it was nice getting to live in Philadelphia, see them. There's a ton of like ancient museums and monuments and really interesting historical stuff. Also just some absolutely gorgeous neighborhoods. And of course, because Philadelphia, you know, you've got the trains that can go to Jersey, to New York, to pretty much anywhere. It was easy to kind of get around and see stuff when I wanted to.
Did you do the infamous run up the steps with Rocky Balboa?
I have not done the run, but I've been to the museum several times.
I ran up there. I was still in the Army when I was going to grad school. I was still in the Guard. So I was in shape then. So I did the run up and down the... it wasn't quite as steep as the movie would make you think, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't nothing either.
Right.
Did you go through the Pats and the Genos and all the different Philly cheesesteak places?
Yep, I tried Pat's, Geno's, and Jim's. I got to say, they're all good, but if I had to pick one, I think Pat's is my favorite.
Oh, I like Jim's better. Do you like the Cheese Whiz or the real cheese?
Well, it's Philly. You got to have the Cheese Whiz. It's authentic.
Yeah, I know it's authentic, but it's also authentically going to pickle your liver, so I went with real cheese. I know, it was heretical.
When in Rome, man.
Yeah, I get it. I tried it just so I knew what I was talking about. And the other cool thing was that like their Eagles fans are fanatical. Like, yes. So one of the kids I went to grad school with was a spoiled rich kid from Tampa. And so his dad got tickets to the Dolphins versus the Eagles game. That was the home game that year. And so he's like, yeah, I'll pay for you guys to go. The dad did because it was his corporate write-off. But you have to wear these Dolphins jerseys for good luck for my team. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And the kid was like, yeah, whatever. I can't even remember his name anymore. And then, of course, we show up in Dolphins gear at the Eagles Stadium. And you can imagine how unpopular we were. We got a lot of "Are you lost?" with thick Boston accents. Well, no, Philly accents, I guess. We ended up getting the on-site police station that's at the Eagle Stadium ended up escorting us to our seats.
Oh no!
they're like, do you want to just take that off? And I'm like, I was kind of conditional of getting this free ticket. And it's like, then maybe we ought to walk you to your seats. I can respect the passion, though. Have you been back since college to visit touristy like?
I went back briefly once because after I finished my studies and then went off for work, there were still a few months before until they actually gave me the diploma. So I went back for the graduation ceremony, but not since then.
So what kind of engineering did you study?
Electrical engineering with a focus in signals, and then a more specific focus in music signals. Because computers, at least when I was doing research, they're really good at holding and playing back music, but they're not so good at understanding it. If I were to play a song for you that you've never heard before, you could probably still figure out, okay, I know where the beats are. I know maybe if it's a happy or a sad song. I can figure out if it's a pop song or classical or rap or whatnot. Computers are not very good at that.
Okay.
So my research was largely about, can we make them better? Because logically, if we humans can hear a song that we've never heard before and we can figure all that stuff out, the information must be there somewhere.
Right.
So it's a matter of enabling the computer to go through it. And so that was my grad work. My thesis project was basically we had this big humanoid robot, and I was trying to get it to dance. And the difficulty with a dancing robot is that robots are very noisy things. And when you've got a robot that's dancing, its noise becomes periodic with the music, because if the robot's moving in time with the beat, then its motors will also be kind of going in time. And so you can wind up with a situation where the robot begins tracking its own noise, not the music. And so that was a particular challenge I was dealing with.
Oh,
and
nice.
And then when I was doing my postdocs, I kind of stayed in that general area, but it was more applied. So things like, can we use computers to select a music playlist for people that are trying to exercise? Find songs that will motivate a given person to exercise. Or some people, when they're trying to learn a second language, they sing as part of their pedagogy. But you don't want to just try any song for that, because imagine you're trying to learn a new language and I give you some heavy metal song where the lyrics are all, shrieking and screaming and you can barely even understand them in the native language. That's obviously not optimal. So the problem there was, can we automatically assess intelligibility of a song so that we can then determine, okay, given a certain person's level of fluency, we need songs that are a certain level of intelligible for them to be useful.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah, that was really fun. So I was able to do that for a few years. I came back to the States. I spent about 18 months at a music tech startup with a guy I knew from grad school and a few others. There we were trying to predict musical popularity. I'm sure you can imagine that record labels would like to be able to know, here's song X. Here's about how many downloads it's going to get, or here's about where it's going to chart. And then after that, that was about 18 months. Then I kind of moved out here. I'm working actually not in the music field at all right now, but still in signals and engineering. I'm working just at a big engineering firm in Salt Lake City.
Nice. So it's essentially the predictive language model, but for sound instead of text.
There was some of that, and then there was some of that sort of machine learning type stuff, also just some pure signal processing. At the startup, we were also, the guy I knew from grad school was a psychologist. So it was more, the science of how do we humans interpret and understand music? Because again, if we can do it, theoretically, we should be able to make a computer able to do it.
Interesting. So do you think we'll ever get to a point, and I know you didn't come here to talk about your engineering, but it's just fascinating. Do you think we're going to get to a point where AI could actually compose music?
We're there.
Really?
Yeah, there are AI written songs you can find them online. I don't know if they're probably still not quite as good as a human musician, but they're at the point already where they're serviceable in the sense that if you're making like an advertisement and you're like, I want some sort of generic background jingle, you can probably find an AI to do it. Now, whether you should, because some people will say, well, you're stealing from whatever you trained on, that's another issue. But strictly in terms of the technical capability, we've got that already.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance there. And I don't even, if there was a way to ethically source the information that it's uploading to train itself on, I don't even necessarily have a problem with that. Although there's so much audio stuff that's in the public domain at this point, I don't know why they wouldn't just use all of that.
Well, as someone who's done a lot of research in this area, the issue with copyrights in music has actually been one of the sort of a stumbling block for research for a while, because as you can imagine, if you're trying to train a machine learning algorithm on 1 million songs and the songs are all copyrighted, that can be an issue if you're, again, assuming your lab is, cares about that.
Yeah, so, I could see that. I know the running joke was that if you ever wanted to, make funny videos that you don't ever want to get on the internet for insert whatever reason, and to play a Disney music and song in the background because they're going to strike it.
Yep.
And I mean, that's true for a reason, right? Like you and I, well, I don't know how old you are, but I was born in the 80s, if that helps. I remember the Napster purges in the early aughts. So like, the copyright issue for music is something they're still grappling with as we convert to the more individual generic, or not generic, internet uploads, and instead of physical CDs and such.
Sure.
I
mean, I know what they did for research. I don't know how far it got, but there were some attempts to make a kind of research license, where the idea was that if you got a license, then you could use songs for research, but you couldn't use them for other purposes. I'm guessing eventually the record labels will probably try to make some sort of AI license where they will let people, or the LLM companies, license their music for a fee. What you might also see is just companies that have tons of audio already, like Disney, Paramount, Universal, these big media companies. What I would expect is they will start training models solely on their own data, because if they've got all the data already, that should get them past a lot of the copyright and legal issues.
Right.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting to see how that pans out.
Sure. It doesn't still get around the ethics issues of, well, a person sold them a song, didn't necessarily sell them the rights to use it to make 20 very similar songs. But, if it keeps them out of court, they might do it anyway.
The funny when you talk about ethics is when they first did the music in the old VHS days for the Don't Pirate the video intro thing that they did, they hired it only to show it at the film festival. And that was the license. They hired this guy to write this little background jingle music, and then they used it on every VHS. And he found out years later, and he ended up suing them for pirating his anti-piracy song.
The irony.
Yeah, I was just like, they did an interview with him I found online, and he was like, yeah, at that point in time, like, I'm not going to get much for it, but I had to sue him on principle because it was like an anti-piracy song. I know lawyers will probably start looking at the AI stuff. I don't know if you've been following at the time of recording, which is late March, but the large language models that have been training off authors' books.
Oh yeah, I read that, like Meta or someone.
Mine was one of the books on there, and I know just because I hear other authors talk, or because when they looked their name, they found mine. I know they're thinking there's going to end up being some sort of class action lawsuit, which you and I both realize means only the lawyers win.
Yeah,
but I suspect that might force change in how they do it to be ethical.
Well, not necessarily. When there was a big lawsuit against Facebook a few years ago because they had violated some Illinois law about biometrics, I think.
Okay.
And because technically the Facebook account, I was on that, and I got like $400.
Oh.
I'm sure it's nothing like what the lawyers got, but I'm like, Facebook's paying for my groceries for a couple of weeks.
Woo-hoo. Nice. Of course, nowadays with the price market we got now, that might be like, that'll buy me a meal.
Get some eggs.
Get some eggs. Oh, the memes about Easter and we're not doing eggs this year because price. They've been off the charts. All right, so. Because this is the Blasters and Blaze podcast, you distracted me with the fascination because I was a band nerd, so music's kind of my jam. That's the worst part about losing hearing because of my injuries, is that I can't hear music to the degree that I used to. But it's definitely something that there's something to be said for soothing the soul, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that would be good when you talk about predictive music models, where like I want something to work out with. Also, you might want, I want something that's safe to drive with, because I don't know about you, but there have been times where I'm driving and then the song gets really upbeat and I find, oh crap, I'm speeding. so maybe something mellow for the drive.
Yeah, I can see that.
All right. So, like I said, we got to do the religion questions because it's a tradition. So, Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
I mean, that is a tough question because as much as I enjoy Firefly, I got to say I really like Star Wars. And when I grew up, I didn't just watch the movies. I read like every book in the Legend series that I could get my hands on. I read all the Bantam books. When they did the New Jedi Order, I think there were 19 of them. I read them all. When they got into the Dark Nest trilogy, just all sorts of stuff. And it just gave me so many hours of enjoyment. Just this amazing, a big and rich universe, which it wasn't just huge, but it was so detailed. I mean, there's the joke about how in Star Wars, like every single character has like their own novel. But as a voracious reader, I really enjoy that. I liked being able to read, tales from the Jabba's Palace or tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, and here's a short story about the Look Here Droid Stormtrooper, which was actually there. I remember that one specifically, and it was a good story. And so I've just gotten so much enjoyment out of it. I got to go with Star Wars on this one. But that's in no way a slam against Firefly. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the movie. I hope they bring it back someday.
Yeah, you're either going to have to reboot it completely, which fans will hate, or take the story forward in time. So any of the actors from the original crew you can get, and then everyone else could be like a second generation or whatever. Like they're going to have to push the story forward. We've had that discussion with the Last Starfighter as well, because enough time has passed that some of the actors are no longer with us. Some of them have aged significantly for obvious reasons. But I love the universe of Firefly, the brown coats. Like, you grow up in the South, the whole lost cause motif is kind of, it's not the same, but like that same energy is kind of channeled into that war, which I really dug. So you're not really into Trek?
Not really. I mean, when I was little, sometimes I would watch Star Trek Voyager with my dad, and I enjoyed that. But I never really got into Trek the way I did Star Wars. I did enjoy Andromeda for a season or so, which was kind of, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's like the other kind of Roddenberry's other big thing besides Star Trek. But they had some good episodes there, but I just never really got into Trek itself.
Now, Andromeda, was that the one that had the guy that played Hercules?
Kevin Sorbo.
Yeah.
Yeah. As Kevin Sorbo as Dylan Hunt, the captain.
Yeah, I really like that one too. You got to be careful because Andromeda Strain also became a show, which is a similar name, but not the same.
I read the book. I hadn't heard it was a TV show.
I was told it was made into a movie, but I haven't actually seen it myself. So that now I'm going to have to look it up after the show because I'm curious. But I have read the book.
I've seen some of the Crichton films. I've seen Sphere and Timeline. I don't think I've seen Andromeda. I feel like that would be very difficult to adapt into a movie. Because most of the book is research until it's kind of the end where the guy is desperately trying to disable the self-destruct. But I mean, if they've done it, I'm sure that the director had ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Is there, if you weren't picking from the list we gave you, what would be your go-to science fiction?
Go-to science fiction? Actually, I probably would just say Star Wars. It really is one of my favorite franchises.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. All right. And because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia?
Well, of those three, the one that I've read the most is Chronicles of Narnia, which I read as a kid and I enjoyed because I was young enough that I didn't really understand all the theological references, but I still enjoyed the books. I mean, Lewis is an excellent writer. And it was fun following the Pevensie children and then the others, Jill Poole, I think, and so forth, as they went to Narnia and learned valuable lessons and had all these exciting adventures that always seemed so much more exciting than things I was doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, like many kids who read that, I was disappointed that my closet didn't go anywhere cool.
Yeah, I think that's a common disappointment. I mean, when I got older, I read more Lewis. The Great Divorce, for example, I think is an excellent sort of parable. But there'll always be a soft spot for Narnia in me.
Absolutely. Yeah, fantasy, like a lot of the stuff I found when I was reading fantasy as a kid was more like the pulp era stuff that was just like one-off dime store novel type vibes. Sure. They were a lot shorter. I think the standard novel was like 40 to 50,000 words back then. But it was something you could fit in your jeans pocket or your cargo pocket if you're of the right age. You know what I mean? So I'd get those from the used bookstore and tear those apart. And it was always, I always picked them by the funkiest covers, and I was never disappointed. But covers from the 70s were something else. When it comes to some of those fantasy novels, I like the aesthetic of the 70s and the 80s fantasy novel covers.
Charmingly lurid.
Yes. And not always something I wanted my mother to see on the cover. I'd flip it over when she comes by, like, oh, he's reading another book. Okay. Just because it was safer. But okay. All right. And one of the crying shames of adulthood, speaking of getting older, is that we stopped asking each other the important questions. So we are bringing that back. So what is your favorite dinosaur?
Well, I have recently been on a bit of a Dungeon Crawler Carl kick, so I got to go with the Velociraptor.
Are you enjoying Dungeon Crawler Carl?
I am. I've read up through the 7th book. I'm not on the Patreon, so I haven't read. I think he's up to 5 more chapters there, but I've read through the 7th book. I'm enjoying it a lot. It's interesting. It's actually my first Blood RPG book that I've read, and I can see why it's popular. And because I know there's a stereotype that lit RPG is all about, the main character becomes, nigh omnipotent by halfway through. But the author's really good at showing how even as Carl gets stronger, he's still valuable. He still fails sometimes. He still needs to rely on the people around him. There are still more powerful forces at work. And it's also got a really interesting myth arc, which I think is the other area that kind of sets it apart. And that it's not just about everything's inside the game. It's everything's about stats. As it shows, there's a whole world outside the game, and this Carl's actions inside the game affect the world outside it, and then stuff outside begins getting inside. And it adds a nice layer of complexity that I don't think you see as much maybe in some of the others that have that reputation as being just pure power fantasies.
And reading is escapism, so I have no problem with pure power fantasies. I've been reading through a lot of lit RPG and game lit. Now, I can tolerate them if they're really crunchy, if they've got a lot of the math with the game stats. But for me, it's the trope, not necessarily like I don't need to know if the game would actually work. I've got a friend of mine who I've met because she's a reader of the books, and she went to that I can't remember the university in Florida where they actually do game design as one of the majors, and she majored in it. And she's like, no, I'll break it down. Some of these games, the math just doesn't work. It would never like. I don't care about that as long as it's good. But given that you're an engineer and so numbers presumably are your jam, do you actually like care if the stat stuff works as a game, or do you just turn off that part of your brain?
I don't care about it so much in the book as long as they're written in such a way that it feels plausible. In actual games, like if I'm playing an RPG, Baldur's Gate or something, and the math starts going awry and the math starts looking out of whack, then I would notice. But like in the book, I just kind of wanted to. I mean, it's fundamentally lit RPG might have RPG mechanics, but it is fundamentally books. And so as long as the prose and the story makes it seem like the game mechanics should work, I'm fine with it. As for power fantasy, I'm okay with them too in small doses. In fact, the book that I'm going to discuss with you in a little bit, Witch of Knightcharm, originally there were some power fantasy elements in it. But I mean, lit RPG also has a reputation that they can go on for a long time. I was recently at a panel about lit RPGs at a convention, and someone asked the panelists, so what are your favorite lit RPGs that have concluded? And the panelists were like, they never conclude. That's part of the genre. And so when you have a really long story like that, then it becomes difficult to just do endless power fantasy because it gets repetitive. Character beats the monster. He beats the stronger monster. He beats the even stronger monster. So something like Dungeon Crawler Carl, where again, Carl will sometimes lose. He'll sometimes fail, have to go to a backup plan, sometimes fail to save something he cares about. It really helps keep the series fresh and interesting, and also keeps the stakes high.
Yeah, at a certain point in time, you're basically fighting gods, or
exactly.
and that's I've seen a meme floating around. I follow a lot of on the Twitter account that we have for the podcast because I don't actually have my own. The temptation to dive political is just too strong, so I'm like, nope, it's just for the podcast. I stay away from it as a personal side. But I follow some like gaming accounts because I'm interested in like RPGs. And there's a meme floating around that says they say DMs are like gods, but we're not but we're not because gods are just NPCs. With a lot of the games, that is very true in some of this power fantasy lit RPG genre.
Yeah. Now, some RPGs that get away from that, like in the Fate system that the Dresden Files RPG uses, they have mechanics for characters they have mechanics for characters which are not intended to be defeated in stats, because they say any number can be reduced to 0. So they have monsters which are just there are no stats. This creature is divine or otherwise so powerful that you cannot beat him directly in combat. You need to come up with a way to kind of outmaneuver him or get around him without actually fighting him. And I think it's kind of clever how they do that.
Now, is that an actual tabletop game, or is that
Dresden Files RPG is an actual game.
Are you a tabletop gamer then?
Not very much, but I'm a Dresden Files fan, and because the manuals are written from an in-universe perspective, they're written as like some of Dresden's case notes. I got them mostly for the additional lore and some of the side bonus content. Like there's a short story in one of them.
Cool.
That was there several years before it was collected in an anthology. So I got and read the manuals for that reason. I don't play it myself.
That's fair. And the art is, I'm sure, amazing.
Yes, the art is gorgeous.
Okay. So one of the last and most important question we ask all of our guests, because we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. So coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
Well, I hate to be one of those knuckle dragging troglodytes, but I'm usually, if I'm going to drink something besides water, it's probably soda.
Okay. What's your beverage of choice? Coke or Pepsi?
I like a good root beer. Mug root beer, A&W, Daz.
Okay. Have you tried the original root beer, the sassafras?
I think I have a
No.
while.
Is it
Sarsaparilla?
Yeah.
Sarsaparilla? I think I have a long time ago, not recently.
I did at a reenacting event I went to. Was it something that you liked, or you just don't remember?
I don't remember. It's been a real long time, but I kind of feel like I've tried it before.
It's a lot similar, but probably also a lot less chemicals. So okay, so one of the parts that we do of the interview is we kind of let the listeners know how we first found them. So you actually reached out to us. So how did you find us?
I was about a month and a half ago. I was at a conference called Superstars, which is a big writing conference in Colorado Springs. It has phenomenal guests. I mean, some of the guests are people that I grew up reading. Kevin J. Anderson. I read all of his Jedi Academy books when I was young. Jim Butcher, again, through Dresden Files. Just absolutely top-notch guests. And so I kind of made that a goal to go to there for a while. And this year I was finally able to do it. And while I was there, I just ran into people who were talking, and they mentioned your podcast. They said, hey, they're looking for guests, that it's very good in terms of the interviewer, ask good questions and you can have a really good conversation. So I thought, okay, I'm always up for, trying new things. So I reached out to you, and you were very accommodating. And here I am.
I noticed that on your author page on Amazon, because I know you publish outside of Amazon. In fact, we might even, because of you, be doing an interview with the platform you're using, because I've never heard of it, which means maybe our readers haven't. And we, Amazon is not the only place we can buy books, and I like supporting those places where possible.
Yeah.
But I'm going to assume, based on what I saw on Amazon, at least, that you like short content. Is that true?
Yes. Besides the novel that we'll be discussing in a little bit, I've written a bunch of short stories. Now, a lot of that's for my freelance for various clients, so that's not really published necessarily on Amazon, or at least it's not published sort of in my other section. But I've also submitted stuff for my own IP, and I've sold it to various venues. I think on my Amazon, you'll see there's like Phobos Magazine, which was a Philadelphia area sort of horror / history magazine. I sold a short story to Mothership Zeta, which was all sorts of genre fiction. I sold, in fact, I've got a copy here I sold a short story to these guys, Fantastic School Sports, which is actually a tie-in to the novel that we'll be discussing in a little bit.
Oh, cool.
And there's a few others. But yeah, probably the bulk of my short story sales have been to freelance clients, and the bulk of those aren't available on Amazon because they would, work for hire. I sell them the content, and then they go and do what they want with it.
Nice. Now, is that something, if it's work for hire, that you ever get the rights back, where you can put a bundle together, like a collection of your own works?
I don't know if there's anything, and then I don't think there's anything in the work for hire contracts I've done that allow for that. Some of them, I know the people, and it's possible I could reach out to them and say, hey, I'm interested in doing this thing. Will you allow me to do this? And a couple of them I can think of who might say yes. Others, probably not. I mean, my biggest client was a company called EduLand, which is an educational literature group that's based in Hong Kong. And they were trying to put together a library for the ESL market.
Okay.
It turns out in China, there is a huge market of parents who really want their kids to grow up and learn to speak English. And so EduLand had really ambitious goals. They wanted a library of, I think, 45,000 short stories to collect in a 3-year period. And so I found out about the project about a year in, and I responded to one of their ads, and they said, they read the sample set and said, okay, great, go write for us. And so I wrote them over 100 stories, actually, which is 7 cents a word, was really nice. And it was also great practice and experience. What was cool about them was, because it's for little kids, and also because, it's supposed to be educational, so there were some very strict content restrictions on what I could write. It was fun trying to figure out how to be creative even within those restrictions, and even within topics that might seem fairly staid or might not seem easy to traumatize, trying to write interesting stories in 4,000 to 8,000 words. And so, yeah, those are my biggest clients. I don't think those are publicly available, at least not in America. I don't know if they've ever actually sold them in China.
Okay. Did those ever get produced, or did that?
I don't know. I kind of fell out of contact with them after my contract with them ended. I'm not sure, but every now and then I Google it, and it should be fun one day to see, oh, hey, there's my story on some, website where they're selling it. But in terms of stuff for the American market, my biggest freelance client is probably a group called Tellest, TELLEST.org. It's an online fantasy universe with people in a bunch. They've got content from a bunch of people. It's just, high fantasy with some twists on it. I've got all these here too. Yeah, here we go. So I've got several stories in this anthology, which again I sold them and they published here, and I believe you can buy on Amazon. I believe.
Nice. Do you have a preference of fantasy or sci-fi? Like, is there one that's your go-to?
I tend to write more fantasy. I don't know. I think my day job, I do so much engineering and science. It's kind of fun to go and write in other, stretch kind of other areas of my brain and kind of focus more on the fantasy as opposed to more science, but it's slightly in the future. And so I think I kind of gravitate towards the more fantastic side of the genre literature.
Is there any fantasy subgenre? Because, fantasy is kind of a broad brush in and of itself. Is there any fantasy subgenre that appeals to you the most?
I don't know. I mean, I've written a good mix of high fantasy, which is what Tellist is, and urban fantasy, which is like the stuff I sold to Mothership Zeta and to Phobos. I like them both. Recently, I've been experimenting with some more sort of comedic fantasy. I've got one sort of comic, like a humorous fantasy story that I'm sending to the various markets now. I'm thinking of trying to write some more. It's tough. I find humor can be challenging, but challenging in a good way. And of course, in terms of what I read, Discworld is fantastic. The Unidentified Funny Objects series, edited by Alex Schwartzman, which is a collection of humorous science fiction and fantasy series, is top notch in terms of that content. So
humor is so there was an anthology that MD Cooper put out as a series of them there was like space humor. And I can't remember it was the tagline, but it's just the pew, I think was something like that was the title. Yeah. And they were looking for short content. And like, I've never written short stories, but they approached me about it. So I'm like, okay, well, let me give it a shot. So I wrote 2,000 words. I'm like, I sent it to them. I'm like, hey, if this isn't what you're looking for, this is all I got humor wise. Like, cause I can write the story, but the humor, like, I'm a military brat. I spent 8.5 years of my life in the infantry. Like, my humor is not everyone's humor. Sure. And we won't tell those jokes because your audience is young adults. So I want them to be able to listen to you talk about your stuff. But I sent it to them and they're like, yeah, this is too crude for what we're looking for. But thanks for trying. And they were super cool about it. Like they recognized that I stopped what I was doing to try to help them fill their list. But then once I'd started, like I couldn't stop myself. I had to finish the story, right? And it ended up becoming a novella. I actually sold it as the Vacuum Sucks Hard Adventures of the USS Big Stick. Okay. And it was so crude. I had to bring a good friend of mine, Chris Winder, on, who's a former Marine, to help me tone down my humor so it was more palatable to the general masses. But one of the things I learned writing that is when you want to write humor, that means like everything you're writing, you're trying to layer meanings on top of. Sure. And it took me twice as long to write half as many words just because like you've got to be so intentional with it. Yes. And hats off to people that can do it. But I'm like, yeah, this is not something I'm going to do again. Like it was just, yeah, well, again, family friendly. So we won't talk about some of the innuendos that I used that I thought were kind of clever, but that took me forever to figure out. Okay. So we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly show for the woman this time. And then when we come back, Aaron, we're going to get you to talk about the book that brought us here.
Okay. Sounds good.
Hey there. This is author Katie Cross. I'm coming at you with an offer for a best-selling fantasy audiobook titled Flame, and it's totally for free. Here's a little bit more about it. Dragon servants Sana and Isadora Spence live deep in Leadham Wood, where persnickety dragons and wars on the borders are the least of their worries. Thanks to years of simmering tension, the hidden village is destined to crack, and soon. Sana's deep love for the giant beast causes her to make an irreversible mistake, while Isadora's disinterest in the dragons leads her to a fateful decision that will change the course of the entire world. Can the sisters prevent everything they know from falling apart? Or do they allow it to break and pave the way for new growth? Join the beloved sister witches in Flame, the first book in the Dragon Master trilogy. Just go to www.katiecrossbooks.com/flame-audiobook to get your free copy today.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us to that commercial interlude. And thank you, Katie, for sponsoring this episode. She writes YA that's appropriate, so I figured it was a good pairing on the commercial. I read that one too. It's got some gut punches on the plot line there. So if you like dragons and you like fiction that you can listen to the audiobook in the car while your kids are there. It's a great one. And she narrates it herself, which is kind of cool. Well, I also kind of hate her because she's good at all the things. The marketing, the publishing, the writing, and oh, by the way, I narrate my own audiobooks. We should all be so lucky. All right. So, I did say that this was YA, but just to clear that up for everyone, what would you say the rating of this, if you're looking at it like from the movie theater rating perspective? What would you rate this?
Probably PG-13. There's no sex. There's no harsh language. There is some violence. Yep, that's the book there.
Okay, so originally this was put up on Kindle Vella, and obviously
Yes,
Kindle stopped producing, which was kind of like I'm a huge fan of short content. I grew up reading short content when I was a tag along for my sister's Girl Scout troop, and it was Reader's Digest everywhere we went. So I read like some of the classics in Reader's Digest form. So like for me, short fiction is the gateway drug for readers, I think, or it can be. So I really wanted Kindle Vella to work, but when you started doing the math, you ended up buying the price of 2 books to read a regular book in length.
Yeah,
so it was kind of destined to fail with the model the way they did it.
Yeah.
So with that out of the way, obviously when Kindle Vella died, you had options. So first off, where can they read it? Because this is not this isn't an Amazon available story.
No, this is currently on a site called Campfire. I've posted the link in the chat here, so I'm guessing you can put it up in the comments.
Yeah, it'll go in the show notes. Okay. Absolutely.
So yeah, it's on a site called Campfire Writing, and the unique thing about Campfire is they allow authors to publish bonus content, which you can unlock as you go through the story. There's an old line by Stephen King where he was writing in one of his books about writing, where he said, I really wish sometimes that I could take this ending and not include it with the book, but only unlock it after, the reader gets maybe 30 pages from the end, and then they have to go and write the publisher and sit and give a summary and say, oh, I know how this, I've read out the story up to this point, so I've earned the ending. Obviously, we can't do that, but we can say is if I want to put in some notes or a character biography or a magic system or really anything, and like, well, I only want this to be available after you've gotten to chapter 40. Maybe it's a biography of a character who doesn't show up until chapter 40. Campfire allows you to do that. And so I've included a bunch of a few dozen pieces of extra content, everything from character biographies to my own notes. Personally, if I'm reading an anthology, I like the section at the end where the author goes and writes notes about here's why I wrote the story, or here's some interesting trivia about it. And so I included some of that. Just all kinds of cool stuff. And when I heard about Campfire, I was intrigued. And then when Campfire said, hey, we've just, we're opening up monetization, apply to us and we will monetize you and if we like your story. So I applied and they said, hey, your story looks good. And so I was one of the first people to kind of set up monetization on Campfire. So I've been able to sell a few books there and to sell a few copies of the extra content too, which is always nice because, logically, if someone is buying your extra content, that must mean they really like the book.
Yeah, and I really do like I said, it was like I looked up obviously in preparation for this show. I clicked on the link because we talked about like you're going to reach out to your contact there, and I'm going to try to get someone from Campfire to come on the show and just talk about the platform. I've never heard of this until today, and I'm excited about new venues. But like just for example of the pricing, dear listener, the Witch of Knightcharm is a finished story. So if you buy just the story, it's $3.99 US. And for the extra content that he's got, I'm assuming it's bonus chapters or something.
Not bonus chapters, but things like character biographies or primers on here's more detail on how this particular aspect of the magic system works, or here's how this particular this part of the magic school where the story takes place, and here's how that works. And I've got a few dozen of those.
And so that is an extra $1, and you got all of that. No, I know I've done that before. So like when I did the Sleeping Legion series, when it finished, when we did the box set, I added a new short story. So that way people, got value from buying it, even if they've read the others. But I also included that kind of stuff like character sheets, incident statements from some of the events that happened in the book. Like it was an actual military document, which sounds like the kind of stuff you could add at Campfire.
Yes.
And then I made up a series of most people don't realize about Army field manuals is you could get the same field manual and it has 3 different numbers because the Army's so disorganized. So like the infantry field manual, there's the same manual with 3 different numbers attached to it, FM, whatever. And there's no rhyme or reason. Like you would think every book that's 700 series would be this kind of book. No, they're all over the place. And so one, I didn't want to just use the same number for the infantry manual that the Army used because I didn't want to get sued. So I was just like, well, what if I just made one up that's organized? So like all of the infantry stuff would be under this number, all of the space stuff and so on and so forth. And then I did excerpts from that with like what a tactical formations might look like in various space settings. Like obviously when you're dealing with 3 dimensions of like assaulting a space station where you're going through the access tube, standard formations don't work because you didn't look up. Right. So I was kind of, I met with my former platoon sergeant. We sat down and we're like, well, how would we do this? And then I wrote it up like it was an actual field man, included all of that. I like the idea that Campfire seems to be, you could do that there too.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's great for a couple other reasons too. One, it lets me, because in the course of the story, I of course have to write up a bunch of notes and character profiles and stuff so I can keep it all straight. And then being able to, when I'm done, being able to put that and let other people see it too, where possible, is really cool. And second, I found it also helped in terms of helping keep the story tight and focused because, I mean, we're both writers. If we come up with some brilliant piece of world building, maybe it doesn't entirely fit with the story, and then there's natural reluctance to throw it out because it's so cool. Campfire, I'm like, wait, I don't have to get rid of it entirely. It doesn't fit in the story, but I can include it in extra content. And so it finds it a lot easier to kind of convince myself, okay, I can kind of cut this section because I don't really need it, make it a bonus thing, and keep the actual novel nice and lean.
Okay. I really like the concept of it. I pulled up just because I know some of this will be viewed on different screens. I feel like the lightness around the image will make this one pop a little better. So I switched to this was the cover as it was originally on the Vela. You just took the Vela part out. Yeah. But I think it's probably a little bit easier for the for the viewer to see. So we'll throw that up there. Or at least it's me. I am colorblind, so this could just be a me thing. But I do like the cover. Is this something that you like when you wrote this story? Did you have the cover in mind first, or did that come later? I know people that have seen covers and then written whole novels based around it.
No, the cover came later. When I was done with when I finished writing the story and I decided to go on Vela, I went to an art commission's Discord and I posted saying, "Hey, here's kind of what I'm looking for. Here's my budget." And I got a bunch of people said, "Hey, we're interested in doing your cover." So I found the guy I like best, and he came up with the image in the middle there, which I'm super happy with. I feel it really kind of captures it's a dark fantasy story, and I think it kind of really captures that well, with the character's face behind the amulet there, and with the broken, the broken medallion, the broken potion bottle on the bottom. I think it was so cool when I got that. I'm like, and it was also cool that I had commissioned someone to create a piece of art. I'm like, wow, this must be what it feels like to be one of those Medici guys who's commissioned all those great art in Italy. Here's artwork that only exists because I commissioned someone to do it. It was a really cool feeling.
Did you get a print that you could frame in your office? I totally would have.
No, but now that you've mentioned it, I may well do that.
It's a cool picture. As someone who likes the kind of witchy things, that's one of the cool things about fantasy. Like I'm digging the art.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would prefer something a little lighter, only because, like I said, with my color blindness, it's harder to see. I didn't know there was a potion bottle in this picture. Having said that, I still like the dark aesthetic, the grayscale. So I still think it's an amazing piece of art, even for my limitations of my vision. So. All right. So obviously we've talked about where you're viewed on. We linked to everything. Is the Campfire something people overseas can use? I don't know. I mean, will it take foreign currency? Like some websites are not set up to take international sales.
I honestly don't know. I haven't tried it myself. So I'm not 100% sure. Sorry.
Okay. Well, if you're overseas, you're listening, and you check it out and you tell us that it is, just respond in the comments. Be like, yeah, nope, I can see it. I can buy it. And now, is this one where when they buy it, they own the ebook? Are they able to download their copy of it? Or is it something that they're leasing like Amazon does? If you don't know, that's okay. I can ask the Campfire people when they come on.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not really as up on the business end. I was just mostly interested in, getting into their monetization program and then putting my book up there.
No, absolutely. It's only something I noticed because it's been all over the news lately. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have even thought of that either.
Yeah.
But like I said, I like support reading platforms that allow, diversification of the business. I think that's just healthier for the market. So I'm excited.
Yeah, fully agree.
Okay. So what was the origin for this story? Like, how did you come up with the idea?
I mean, I've liked magic school books for a while. So things like Harry Potter, for example, or Akata Witch, or there's the entire Fantastic School series of anthologies. And I'd wanted to write one on my own, and I came up with also I had this character. I'm like, I have this character who, she goes to kind of the sort of Hogwarts style, the magic school for good people, and she's trying to fight the people from the bad magic school because, in YA, you got to have the bad magic school. And so I was thinking, well, a lot of times you'd have the character, would be, really strong and would like this little RPG stuff we talked about earlier, kind of overpowering the others. I'm like, what if in this case she's not that strong? She kind of fails the first battle, and maybe she was so focused on imagining how wonderful she'd be as this great good witch who's fighting evil. She spent so much time daydreaming, she didn't train all that much. And so she loses the first battle. She kind of embarrasses herself. And then I was thinking, okay, from there, maybe she's so desperate to redeem herself, she decides that she's going to try to infiltrate the evil school and kind of undermine it from within because she can't think of another way to make up for her big screw up. The good school's not going to let her go on any more missions because she bombed the first one. So she's got to kind of sneak out on her own and do this. And now she's at the evil magic school, and it's very dangerous, and a lot of the students there are hostile to her. And so I kind of built a lot from there. And I also had the idea that on the one hand, she's got to deal with, the physical threats. The lessons are brutal. Some of her classmates are, evil witches who want to take over the world, that kind of thing. But also it occurred to me, the evil school, their leaders probably know that not all the students there are going to be on their side, both because they can figure out, some good students are going to try to infiltrate, but also because evil tends not to work very well with other evil. Evil, as Order of the Stick says, evil is not one big happy family. So the school's gotten very good at corrupting everyone who goes there from whatever they originally believed into following sort of the dictates of the school. And so that kind of sets up a nice dual layer threat for the protagonist. She's got to not only survive and not only try to kind of advance her goal of undermining the school, but she's also got to resist the corruption that would try to slowly break her down and make her into someone who would be happy just serving the evil institution. And so that was kind of the skeleton. And from there I filled out, okay, I need a couple of, maybe not heroes on her side, but people that she can work with who aren't as crazy or evil as the others. I need a couple of antagonists who want to kill or do horrible things, and some, miscellaneous students, and just kind of fill everything out from there.
So did the magic school come to you first, or did the character come to you first?
I mean, it was pretty simultaneous. I had the idea of I have this magic user, tries the good magic school, fails her mission, gets stuck in the bad magic school because she's trying to sneak in. And then from there, I kind of simultaneously built up both the character and in terms of how she would react to things or what kind of powers I could give her and magic specialties that would make it possible but exceedingly difficult for her to take on the various challenges. And also building up the evil school. Okay, what features do I give it that will make it a useful from a narrative perspective? I want the character to be kind of isolated. So make it so the school, you can't leave. Once you're there, they don't let you leave unless you're going on specific missions. I also began working in real world, some mythology from the real world. Are you familiar with the myth of the Scolomonts?
No.
Okay, so if you read your Dracula, you'll find that somewhere in there it mentions, oh yeah, Dracula, he attended the Scolomonts. It's where he learned most of his evil powers. Turns out that dates back to a really old Romanian myth, which there were a couple of anthropologists who wrote about it in the 1800s. About an evil magic school where, once you're there, you can't leave until you graduate, and it's underground, so no one can find it, and you learn all these evil magical arts and things like that. It's been used a few times. It was used in Dracula. It was used in the Cassandra Clare novels. I think Naomi Novik has a trilogy about it. It shows up in World of Warcraft and Hearthstone in some of the side quests. It's like a school for necromancy. And so I decided, okay, we've got this public domain kind of evil magic school. It's got a lot of really cool elements, so I kind of incorporated that into what I was doing as well. I think that kind of really helped it to pop.
Okay, that makes sense. What is the big bad in this? Is it the magic school itself?
Yes, because as the protagonist finds out going in, initially she thinks that her enemies are a couple of the other incoming students who are hostile to her. One group is hostile because she originally came from the good school, and they're like, oh, you come from this group that is always, getting in the way of, our evil plans and has, done bad things to our people we know who are trying to do evil plans. So obviously we hate you. And she thinks there's another student who, had some issues and is been kind of driven into this perpetual state of rage, in part by the school manipulating her. But as things progress, the protagonist realizes, no, the actual enemy here is the school itself. It is an institution which exists pretty much only to corrupt, young magicians and turn them into instruments of its will. And I've got to kind of undermine this place and destroy it, or else, it won't really matter. If I just defeat one of the evil witches here, they'll train another one. That's not going to affect my main problem. But undermining the school itself is the big thing. And then she also discovers at some point there is actually one genuinely innocent person who basically got stuck in the school because her powers are virtually impossible to control and she can't leave without them going haywire. So then Emily, the protagonist, gets kind of a side quest of, okay, is there a way I can get this person out of here so that she's not in the crossfire when this whole thing comes crashing down.
Okay. Is this set in a Earth like a Harry Potter is, where it's just hidden, or is this a whole new world? It is Earth?
Yep, it's contemporary fantasy.
So where is the story taking place? Obviously, the school itself would be hidden.
Yes. It's never specified in text because the protagonist has no way of finding it out. The students are brought there magically. They don't physically go. There is no Hogwarts Express. They're just brought there via magic. So all the character really knows it as underground somewhere. If I had to place it, I would probably say, well, it's probably under those Romanian mountains where the original Scalaman's was said to be.
Is this the good school also set under the mountains?
No, the good school is, I'm trying to think how to describe it. It's also hidden, but it's not under the mountains. It's like it's its own little community, kind of like in a New England kind of forested area, set away from everything. There's illusion stuff, so nobody stumbles in there. And there's dorms and other school stuff there, and that's where it is. And so the main character, but it's accessible enough to the real world that the main character is able to sneak out and to infiltrate the bad school.
Is this something where the magic is hidden then, or are people aware of the magic?
The magic is mostly hidden. There is a small subplot running through the book where it's mentioned that, the government knows magic exists and is sort of discreetly funding the good school because they would prefer the good school stop the evil school because the government doesn't want evil witches to try to attack the country. But most people have no idea magic exists.
Okay. So is in this one, like in some worlds that have magic, even the hidden magic, it's generally lineal, right? Like, so it's passed on from parent to child. Is that the case here?
For some of them, yes. And one of the hostile factions the protagonist encounters in the evil school is a group of witches whose ancestors were all like these really powerful archmages for all these various historical evil factions. There was one witch in the group was like, oh yeah, my great something ancestor was a soothsayer for Genghis Khan. And then someone else was like, oh, my great whatever ancestor was a weather witch for the Barbary pirates, groups like that. And so she kind of has to deal with this group who, because of their lineage, not only are they powerful, but they have all this sort of institutional knowledge they picked up from their families. They have like these special spells, which they've kind of trained in since they were very young, which most of the people don't really know how to do because, again, they're kind of these family lines. But on the other side of things, you've also got, witches who just seem to spring up. Their families aren't magical, but they just happen to be, they just happen to have it. And so that Emily's more towards the latter.
So how do the families of the non-lineal witches, do they know it's a magic school or are they kept in the dark? And like, how does that work?
Most of them are kept in the dark. This takes place sort of in high school. And I mean, I went to a boarding high school, so I'm familiar with the idea of where we go away to a school and be there for weeks or months at a time. And your parents don't, ideally you're calling them or writing them, but they don't necessarily know what's going on in every lesson. And so that would be a case for the students at the good magic school. The evil one, of course, they're kind of taken away and there's no contact. But again, they fall in the mix between their families are evil magicians and they know what's going on anyways, or their families are messed up for some reason and they're kind of out of contact. The evil magic school is not at all opposed to doing things to deal with sort of family members who are, being nosy, even lying to the students about that they did that because they're evil.
So presumably then the ones that are going to the good school would be like, oh, you just won this random scholarship. You might as well take it, kind of thing.
Yep, that kind of thing, exactly. And it's mentioned part of the way through that the government is kind of actively looking out The few people in the government who know about it are looking out for people who might, be magically sensitive. Weird stuff keeps happening around them. Try to get them over to the good school. And then one of the plot points the main character has to figure out is, okay, if the government's trying to find them all these magicians, why does the bad school still have so many people in it? Shouldn't they all have been kind of corralled off to the good school before they even could be recruited by the bad school? And so she begins finding there's some issues with the way the good school is doing things that it require. Then it doesn't work. For example, a couple of the evil students, were from a community that was kind of destroyed in a natural disaster. So that kind of messed up the government's efforts. Another was someone who was sort of a minor celebrity and was constantly, leaving school and leaving where she was supposed to be to kind of do all these press things and, performances. And so because she was running around all the time, she was inadvertently was evading kind of what the government was doing to keep tabs on her, stuff like that.
Okay. Now, is this a series or is it a standalone novel?
Right now, it's standalone with a few short stories. I think I mentioned I've got a short story in the Fantastic Schools Sports Anthology. I've got another one in the Fantastic Schools War Anthology. I just don't have a copy of Fantastic Schools War with me. They both are from the point of view of side characters. The protagonist, Emily, so she's got a couple people which she becomes fairly close to over the course of the story as not exactly necessarily friends because, again, they unlike her, chose to go to the evil school because they wanted something out of it. They weren't trying to destroy it. But they're not instantly hostile to her, and she finds that she can work with them. And so the stories are from their perspectives. I've also got a third one out in submission now, which is from the perspective of one of the familiars. And I'm really hoping that one finds a home somewhere because it was a blast to write.
So for these, like a lot of the Kindle Vella stories don't have the normal, well, they didn't, that kind of model, because there are other places that do that. Royal Road for a while was doing it. I know some people do that on Wattpad where you pay to unlock the chapters. You end up getting plot points where it's almost episodic chapters and it goes on and on because obviously the longer you keep them reading as an author, the more money you're making. So the pacing is different in that style of story. You see some of that with the lit RPG like we discussed earlier.
Right.
That was originally being released because some of the original lit RPG, my understanding, was coming from Russia and the Orient. Is that something that's the case here? Like, what is the length we're talking about? Like how, because, for pacing sake.
Well, I had written the entire book before I began even going on Kindle Vella.
Okay.
So I wanted to make sure that I didn't run into a problem where I'm doing episode by episode and I write myself into a corner. Because, that's sort of one of the big pitfalls that you hear about with episodic fiction is if you're just going chapter by chapter, it's easy to come up with something that seems really cool in a chapter, and 3 chapters later you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. So I wrote it all out before doing that, and then I broke it up in episodes later, and I rewrote individual chapter endings mostly so that they would work as episodes. They would all finish sort of at a narratively satisfying point. But yeah, no, the book was all written and planned out from the start so that it doesn't just kind of go on forever, but there's a beginning, middle, and end, arcs, and so on.
Yeah, it's almost like if you do it the episodic way, you almost got a collection of linked short stories.
Yeah.
As opposed to chapters as you would think of them in the proper sense.
Yeah. And as for the other side, you asked, is this a standalone or more? Right now, again, standalone with a couple of shorts, but I mean, writing another one is something that I want to do in the future. I'm working on a couple of other projects right now, but it's something that I do want to get back to. And depending on how things go in the future, I might be able to do that sooner rather than later.
So is this something that gives you a satisfactory ending at the end of The Witch of Knightcharm?
Yes.
Okay. Because some authors leave you on a cliffhanger and then they abandon books and you want to shake them.
No, it comes to a narrative. It comes to a narrative conclusion. Emily completes sort of the arc that she's undergoing in the first book. She deals with the specific challenges that she has there. And while sure she's primed for future adventures, if and when I write the second book, I mean, it's at the point where the ending, it's a conclusion. It doesn't just stop. It has a real ending.
Nice. So is this something like the kind of schools that if you were like, would you want to live in a world that has those kind of schools and go there?
Well, not the evil one.
Obviously.
Because, I wouldn't want to go to a school where if you screw up too many homework assignments, then they're like, okay, you're going to be we have a curse lesson and you're the one that's going to get the curses put on you, as a punishment. Or a school where one of the ways to advance a class rank is magic duels, which is a big element in the world of the book, is that one of the only ways to move up in class rank is by dueling other students. And the protagonist, she doesn't want to fight, but she needs to move and get better equipment, and also so she can be in a position to more effectively undermine the school. And she realizes, she goes on, oh, this is one of the ways school's corrupting me, because I need to fight and do these evil things in order to get more, be stronger while I'm here, and then I get more focused on, just getting stronger and winning the fights, not as much on undermining the school and things like that. So it's kind of a cool push and pull there, where she needs to figure out how to survive in the school without being corrupted by it. But in terms of the good magic school, yeah, I mean, when I was a little kid, I enjoyed Harry Potter. Like I said, I read A Cut of Witch. Just all the stories like that. I read Sorcery Hall, I think it was, by Susie McKee Sharness. Just all that kind of stuff of, middle schoolers or high schoolers learning that they can do all these incredible magical things and go on these wild adventures. I mean, when I was really little, I was reading My Father's Dragon. I don't remember who that's by, but which was another story about, a guy who discovers, hey, he's got this kind of bond with dragons. He can go on this wild adventure with them. Those always appealed to me as a kid.
Now, you did mention that you wrote a side story from the POV of one of the familiars. So are there familiars for everybody, or is that a one-off kind of thing?
Not for everybody. There's a few familiars. One of the school's leaders has a wolf familiar, and one of the ways, one of the issues that the press with her is, oh, she seems not as evil as the others, but I'm kind of worried her wolf was going to eat me. This particular story that I've written and I'm shopping right now is actually from the point of view of a goat familiar. And the goat is the only prey animal that is familiar in the school. All the others are predators. There's wolves and lions and hawks and so on. And so as you can imagine, being the only prey animal in school where everyone else is either an evil witch or the familiar evil witch is kind of a nerve-wracking experience. And so it was really fun to kind of write the book from the goat's perspective, write the story from the goat's perspective, and kind of showcase how the goat would, both some of the unique magic the goat might have as a result of the particular witch she's bonded to, and kind of also how she would, understand and feel about things as she goes through the school.
Now, is that one of the short stories that's included in the bonus content?
No, that one, like I said, I'm pitching to a few.
Okay, that was not published yet.
Yeah, that's not published yet, but I'm really hoping it does, because it was a blast to write. It was a lot of fun. I think readers will really enjoy it, and so I got my fingers crossed.
Nice. Is there anything about this world that I haven't asked? I feel like you've been pretty thorough, but is there anything you think the readers and potential readers of this story need to know?
I try to have a big variety of different types of magic that the students specialize in. So not just, flicking wands at each other and shooting sparks or blasts of energy, but I mean, and now it's not just the typical things like there's a potions expert, of course, and so on, but just all sorts of different things, all kinds of different magic. So the duels could be really interesting, because I didn't want just to have everyone kind of, for lack of a better word, have a magic stat. Like this character is this strong at magic and this one's this strong, and so that's kind of the one-dimensional battle. But giving them all unique, very unique spells let me come up with some really sort of intricate and creative battles that I had a lot of fun writing. And it let me kind of put the main character through her paces a lot more, because the protagonist, she's a bit underpowered. Like I mentioned, she starts the story having daydreamed about doing a lot of good but not having trained very often. And so when she goes to school, she realizes that she's not going to do very well in just straight up fights. So she has to use the kind of limited spell power she has. And what she mostly has to do are utility spells. So like she has a kind of a flashlight spell. She can make sort of limited shield platforms with a magical amulet that she crafts. And then, okay, she's got, magical platforms. Can she use those more offensively by, say, shoving them into people? Can she use them in combat to maybe step on them and jump over or around enemy attacks? Can she use them as shields? Things like that. And then for opponents, I did everything from, I had fun writing one character who's actually the protagonist of one of these stories in the Fantastic Schools Biology, whose magic is just, makes her stronger. So she's a very sort of physical fighter. And it was fun having the main character come up with all these like intricate, crafted plans for the battle. And the other character's like, my plan is I'm just going to punch really hard. But then I went on the other side. I gave some characters talents, which were things like necromancy or stuff like that, where it's not physical at all, but it's all just purely offensive magical power. And so the protagonist has to find a way to deal with that as well. And so just dealing with the different challenges, I found was a really useful way to kind of keep the story varied and fresh.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the things I like when you see people, like you see a lot, the trope with the elemental magic, and it's just the obvious stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas like if you can control metal, what's to say you couldn't like hurt someone by pulling the iron out of their blood?
Exactly.
Like just get creative with it. And like, that's the hardest part though, is you got to think of those things. And then of course, when somebody else reads it, why didn't you do that? Because I didn't think about it, which is being able to step back enough to get some of those creative ideas is part of the fun of that genre.
Exactly. That's also, I mean, and I also, while I was diversifying the magic, I also made sure that all the students at the evil school have a different reason for going there. So I wanted to avoid, the student who's there at the evil school just because she kind of just likes being evil. That's a bit cliche. So like the characters that the protagonist bonds with, her roommate is someone who went there because her family was destroyed by organized crime, and she wants to have revenge on the criminals, but the law is not doing it, and she isn't strong enough on her own. So she's like, okay, if I go to this school, when she got recruited, she's like, okay, I'm going to learn all these evil spells. I can use them to get revenge and avenge my family and stop these villains. There's another character who was brought up in sort of a very abusive family where she was told, you're only valuable if you can contribute, if you can work. And so she's really internalized that. So she went to the school because she's like, I want to get stronger so that I can work more effectively, I can do more things, and I can have value. Where some of the villains, like I said, there's a few of the witches who have very storied lineage who want to basically live up to their family legacies and acquire power and influence and control stuff with their evil magic. There's one student there who's just a merchant. She's sort of she's basically the class potion master and crafter, because one of the ways the evil school functions is you have to be of a sufficient class rank to get things like supplies or books, certain books at the library, supplies at the school store. So if you're not in that rank, you're in a position where, you can't get good equipment, but without the good equipment, you can't get better rank and so on. And so there's one student who basically becomes sort of the crafter, because when she gets out of the school and graduates, she wants to sell stuff. She's like, hey, if I can make magic potions, I can basically make drugs that they can't detect. Imagine if I can make a strength potion, athletes would pay a lot of money for, a magical strength potion or speed potion that the FDA couldn't detect because the FDA doesn't know what magic is. And so she has motives along those lines. And then I've got one student there who's just a thrill seeker. She's like, hey, a school where you can learn spells to blow things up, sign me up. That sounds awesome. And just sort of a wild and chaotic student like that. And so again, by keeping things varied, I found I was able to keep the story more fresh and interesting.
So the evil isn't just evil. Some of that might even just be chaotic neutral if you're looking like from a gaming term.
Well, chaotic neutral, although then the story would ask, well, if you're just blowing stuff up, maybe you don't intend to hurt anybody. People are still going to get hurt if you, blow stuff up, in the downtown or whatever. So isn't that still evil even if you don't intend it? The story, it's not really a philosophical track like that, but it's one of the things that the protagonist has to figure out is, how far can I bend or take advantage of the school, of the power the school's offering me before I break and just become another member of its, evil regime.
Okay. Do you come to a conclusion on that topic, or is that something you leave? You do.
No, it comes to a conclusion. One of the way the main character is recruited, she has a sort of mysterious mentor type figure who's an upperclassman who's kind of mentoring her, but her mentoring is often kind of throwing her in the deep end and being like, okay, if you survive this, you're going to learn a lot and be a lot stronger for it. And so part of Emily's journey is figuring out what the mentor's doing and figuring out, okay, can I use what she's teaching me, but without actually, becoming the kind of person she is, the kind of person who would take a new witch and throw her into a death trap and say, hey, if you get out of it, you'll be stronger.
Almost like the agave that the Spartans used.
Yeah.
Throw them in the deep end, and if they die, they die. Or what's the other one that Lord Farquhar? Some of you will die. It's I'm willing to make.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that is one of the best lines in fiction I have ever heard. Like, I only wish I thought of it first.
Yep.
Okay, so I feel like we've got a pretty good wrap on the story. It definitely sounds interesting. I will get with you after we're done with this about reaching out to the campfire guys, because that definitely sounds interesting. So as we wrap this up, dear listener, this is the part where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. So do your part, and you can review them. I checked over there on Campfire, so you can review it there when you buy it, and you can also go over to Goodreads probably. If it's not on Goodreads, you can ask the librarians to add it, so you can review it there. So with that out of the way, Aaron, how can listeners find you?
I'm available on Twitter and Blue Sky, and I've got my website, which has a list of all my publications, and there's also my book and my Amazon author page.
All right, we will link to all of that in the show notes. dear listener, but you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blaze podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blaze podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters, the Spotify, the Discord, the Blasters and Blaze Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandblazepodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandblazepodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans from Adam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till it pours out of their ears, people, and that would just be shameful. We'll film it so you can point and laugh with us. And if you want to drink some of that coffee brand coffee for yourself, the link is in the show notes. Use the code PODCASTGRUNTS. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win, people. This is not a drop shipping operation. Nay, this is roasted and made in America. Obviously, the beans are grown elsewhere, but it is an American company, and so you can get it shipped to the continental U.S. It's a form of shopping local, which is a good thing. And with that soapbox ended, because Stabby gets really mad if I get too preachy, I will say thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blaze podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thanks for coming on, Aaron. We'll have to have you back for some of your short fiction. I'll see what I can arrange at a later date, because we do short episodes for short fictions that are also fun. And we'll have to have you back for future episodes, because this was enjoyable.
Thank you. Happy to be here. It was a good time.
All right. With that, I'm going to hit the end button.